Calin Rovinescu is the President and CEO at Air Canada, and he is with us now. Calin, thank you very much for being with us today.
My pleasure, Amanda. Good to see you again.
Now, I know you just reported the quarter, and so you talked to analysts about this, but I really want to start with how you think your business is doing in the context that you're not done yet. Is your balance sheet safe? Are you feeling comfortable about surviving this pandemic?
Right. I guess maybe I'll start with the balance sheet first. We had one of the strongest balance sheets in the global airline industry coming into the pandemic, which, from our perspective was somewhat of a rainy day fund. We never expected this level of rainy day, but this was, we had, relative to our revenues, we had one of the strongest balance sheets around. And so that sustained us. And that also gave us, the ability to raise incremental additional liquidity, both, debt, aircraft financing, and we did some equity as well. And we've raised approximately $6 billion since the start of the pandemic. So our balance sheet is in good shape, but of course we're burning a tremendous amount of cash as we are in this, what I would characterize as a state of deep hibernation that we're currently living, operating at something approximately 10% of our passenger revenues compared to last year.
And so as you manage that cash burn, and we can talk about it in any number of ways, the one that tells the story, I think, is $8,000 a minute. You look to governments. There are two aspects of that, Calin. Governments are controlling how you can operate, quarantines, travel restrictions still in place. And they've also not offered any kind of sector-specific aid to you. I want to take those in pieces. Let's start with government aid. Why the long delay in getting anything to this sector?
First of all, around the world, governments have supported their airlines in something that is approaching $200 billion US. The number varies between 175 and $200 billion US. All countries of the world that have provided some aid to their industries, and Air Canada is, of course, one of the largest carriers in the world. We're in the top. We're the only one of the non-state-owned carriers in the top 20 that has received no sector-specific support. But the reason I'd say goes back to a fundamental principle of policy that the Canadian government chose when it made pronouncements early on in the pandemic, which was that it would not provide sector-specific support for any industry, that it was a sector-agnostic approach with between the various programs. They also wanted to get funds out to individuals right away, which was, of course, the early days of CERB and CEBA and so on. And then they had the wage subsidy, which did provide us, some modest wage support, which went to our employees, but nowhere along the lines of what went on in other countries. And so I'd say that is the origin of it, is that it was a policy decision of the government to not be sector specific. And I think it took the government some time to appreciate that our industry touches so many parts of the Canadian economy. Obviously, it's a main driver of tourism. It's a main driver of purchase of aerospace. Air Canada on its own, we generate nearly $20 billion of revenue last year, but our economic footprint is about $50 billion to the Canadian economy. So, they realize now that it touches many communities, many regional markets, and I think this is why there has been, in recent weeks, a renewed discussion about it in Ottawa circles.
Not without, it sounds, some strings attached, Calin. Things like, we've heard many things, including cash refunds to travelers and even equity stakes by government in your airline. What's on the table for you in terms of accepting aid?
Well, again, we have a decent liquidity position, so we would hope that we would have reasonable terms that would enable us to be competitive, because our objective has been to not only survive, but be able to be competitive coming out of the pandemic. And we're competing with carriers from around the world who have been supported by their governments, and so we hope that the terms would be on a reasonable basis. So we have yet to see the suggested terms. We do know the minister has made it clear that refunds would be required, and based on the size and scale of the program, we have no issue, no quarrel with that at all. We've already refunded about $1.2 billion of refundable fares, and of course, there's been a lot of pressure in terms of the non-refundable fares. And so we would definitely do that, assuming that the terms of the support package are adequate and that the terms are appropriate and reasonable. As far as equity is concerned, there's a long history of governments owning equity in airlines, and the track record is not too good. I would say in virtually all countries of the world, other than I would say the city-states that you have in the Gulf region, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Doha, and Singapore. Short of that, state ownership of airlines has been a colossal failure elsewhere in the world, and we are certainly not advocating for it.
So just in terms of your ability to survive all of this, Calin, you have, you've raised debt and equity. You were able to strengthen your balance sheet. It leaves you with long-term liabilities, though. Is there an inflection point for you as you look down the road? If we don't get a vaccine in time, if we don't get air travel normalizing in the time frame you've laid out, that you begin to worry about your ability to service your own debt?
No, look, I think we still have, the good thing about what we've been doing over the last decade is that we built not only a strong balance sheet, but a strong portfolio of assets. And so we have staying power, more staying power than most airlines, most non-state-owned airlines of the world. So we know that we could sustain this, for some time. But again, the question is, what shape will we be in as we go through it? And we've had an amazing run where we were servicing almost 220 destinations around the world, cities around the world, between Canada, the United States, and globally. So obviously our network is suffering, our fleet is suffering, our aircraft orders are suffering. We've reduced aircraft orders, we're reducing capital. So this goes into, we're an essential infrastructure for both the country and connecting the country to the global markets. And that's why it's so important, I think, for government to act responsibly when it comes to our sector and to at least make us in a position where we can compete with some of the leading carriers in the world that we were competing before this.
On that front, Calin, even the International Air Transport Association has said Canada has moved too slowly and not keeping up with others in terms of travel restrictions, quarantines, things that have really impeded your ability to get volumes back up. What's your reflection on how government has managed through this, and what should change now?
We've advocated for some time that there should be a greater incidence of science-based measures in looking at the various travel restrictions. And so, I would take a step back and say, at the beginning of the pandemic, when we were dealing with this in the early days of March, and quite frankly, even before March, we ourselves at Air Canada stopped flying to China on January the 29th. Which was well ahead of the government having declared a pandemic, because we didn't like what we were seeing out of China and the risk for our employees and our customers at the time. But we appreciate that in the early days there was a lot of confusion, a lot of uncertainty as to what needed to be done. And so we're totally at peace with that. But as we've gone into this deeper and further, we're now 9 months into it. And, we face 5 layers of restrictions in Canada. One is a blanket prohibition on international travelers, unless you have a visa or a particular circumstance. Border closure, complete border closure with the United States. We have the 14-day quarantine for all returning Canadians or travelers who are able to gain access to the country. And the 14-day quarantine, I would say, is the highlight of the problem. We, of course, have an Atlantic bubble that prohibits even Canadians from accessing the Atlantic provinces, either without quarantine, or in some cases there's a total prohibition. And finally, if that was not adequate, we then have an overriding travel advisory advising against non-essential travel, which had the effect of nullifying insurance policies for those people who did want to travel. So that combination, while it may have been appropriate on March 14th, I'd suggest that on November 17th needs to have different shades of gray. There are a lot of new initiatives that have come up on the testing front, and testing is really to some degree, the silver bullet here. Thoughtful testing, and we're going through a key testing pilot at Pearson, where the results are overwhelmingly in favor of showing that there is an alternative to the 14-day quarantine. Over 99% of the passengers who've arrived at Pearson under this study that was quarterbacked by McMaster University, over 99% of the passengers who arrived test negative on day one. Of the 1% that tested positive, or less than 1% that tested positive, 70% of that 1% are negative on day 7, and the rest are negative by day 14. So it's showing that we are keeping, a tremendous number of people subject to a full quarantine when the science simply does not justify it.
All right, I'm going to lose you. I've got 2 quick questions for you. One is on vaccines, lots of enthusiasm. You have a 3-year horizon forecast to get back to normal volume. Is that still true even if we get a vaccine faster than we thought?
Yeah, I'd say we're still planning we're still looking at 3 years for a recovery back to 2019 levels. We'd said a minimum of 3 years, and that's because in addition to the immediate impact of COVID-19, we've had to make some structural changes, which, including removal of aircraft and reducing orders, which would make it, very, very difficult to get back to 2019 levels, sort of at the drop of a hat.
And last question, and not much time for it, I'm afraid, but I hope we speak again soon. You chose to announce your retirement. Why now? Why, before all of this is over?
We had, Amanda, we had planned this 2020 transition year some time ago. We had named our CFO as Deputy CEO, Mike Russo. And I'm a big believer that you definitely, as a CEO, should play a role in that succession, and you should live with a timeline. For me, it was key. Once we got into the pandemic, I extended the announcement dates and all that, because I wanted to make sure that I was there for the full year to see through our COVID mitigation and recovery plan. But this was a well-planned succession that we've been thinking about for some time, and I think that we're going to be ready to both recover on the other side and ensure that we've mitigated COVID to the best of our abilities.
Calin, there's never enough time. It's great to talk to you. We appreciate your time today. Calin Rovinescu is the CEO, of course, of Air Canada.